Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a very sunny Friday afternoon in June. So we're hopeful that there is somebody out there that we're talking to live. But if not, and you're in a beer garden, then good for you. We are going to be talking about hotspots today and implementation of hotspot policing. Hotspot policing is obviously an area that's got some of the best, most rigorous evidence behind it and has been spoken about a lot recently in terms of serious violence reduction from the government and it's sort of spread out across policing, although it's been around for sort of 20 or 30 years now as a concept. As usual in this webinar series, we're not going to talk about the research at all. We're going to talk to our panel members who have got some hands-on experience of working with hotspot policing in practice and try to tease through some of the issues that you might come into contact with if you're trying to implement this as an evidence-based strategy. I'm Matt Bland, I'm the COO of SEBP, and I am going to be the one who chats inanely through the interesting bits. My co-host is Suzanne Knaber-Nicole. Suzanne, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, Suzanne Knaber-Nicole here from Police Science Doctor from Middlesex University and also working with the Society of Evidence-Based Policing. I've been working with Matt on these webinars and handing back to Matthew now.
Thank you. I should emphasise that these webinars are co-produced with the Youth Endowment Fund, who flag up hotspot policing as one of the key tactics in the YEF toolkit for reducing serious youth violence. So there's a strong emphasis on that as we speak today. I'm going to introduce our two panel members, or ask them to introduce themselves in just a second. Let me just explain the format of what we're going to do here. I will put some questions to our panel members in the first half of this session, and we in the second half would really encourage you to ask any questions that come to you as we talk. You can do that by putting questions into the panel, whatever platform you're on. If it's YouTube, put them in the comments, same on LinkedIn. They will appear on the software that we have, and then Suzanne will put those to the panel in the second half. But let's ask our panel members to introduce themselves. I'll start with Colin from Lincolnshire, please.
Hello, I'm Colin Clarkson, Chief Inspector with Lincolnshire Police. And my involvement in hotspots started a few years ago in Boston when I was a neighbourhood police inspector there. So that's where my experience comes from.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome. And Simon Rose from the Cambridge Centre of Evidence-Based Policing.
Hi, Matt. So Simon from the Cambridge Centre of Evidence-Based Policing. I need to get my apologies in first. I was in the Met for 30 years, so sorry about that. But my involvement in hotspots policing primarily is since leaving, working for the Cambridge Centre. We evaluated the GRIP forces, 18 GRIP forces, their effectiveness of delivery of hotspots policing a couple of years ago. And since then, we've supported 2 or 3 forces delivering hotspot policing operations themselves. That's me.
Fantastic. So what I'm really hoping for from you both is some insight into different levels, different perspectives here. So Simon, of course, you've got knowledge across a number of forces, and I'm not going to ask you to name and shame any of those. Well, I probably will ask you, but you will resist, I'm sure. And Colin, unfortunately, Lincolnshire is going to be fully exposed because it's in your introduction. We know that's where you're from, so you'll tell us what's going on in Boston. Simon, let me start with you if I can. As I said in the intro, this is not, if it's not quite bread and butter for police forces, it's pretty normal practice now to be talking about hotspot policing. But I don't think it's necessarily everywhere. And I just sort of wanted to start with that national view that you've been able to take. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what conditions need to be in place within a force before hotspot policing can be done properly.
Rightio. You're dead right that the implementation is varied. That is is evidenced by the meta-analysis that shows sometimes hotspot policing works, sometimes it works very well, sometimes it doesn't work at all. From what I've seen, it's quite nicely summarised. Professor Larry Sherman talks about the triple T and sometimes now the 6 Ts. The 6 pillars, I would say, that would tends to predict whether or not a hotspot policing is well implemented and succeeds is the targeting, the testing, the tracking, the tasking, the technology, and the training. For me, what I've seen in the 18 GRIP forces and a couple of other forces, the most discretionary, easiest fixes, but also sometimes the least well implemented, are the tasking and the training. By tasking, I mean, in essence, the briefing slides. And perhaps we'll come on to that a little bit later around the importance of integrating the problem-oriented policing longer-term approach into the hotspots policing. So the tasking into the hotspots, the officers are gathering the intelligence to support the analysis in the SARA methodology, so that they're actually providing the information that in that response. But to be really specific around what good tasking looks like, it's about what I've seen. It's about potentially 1 or 2 briefing slides for every single hotspot. That hotspot is not a hexagon or a grid square. It is a manually drawn shapefile down to the specificity of which side of the road they want the officers to walk on. It will provide on that slide a photograph of a particular offender with the details of the offending, where they're likely to live, if the violence profile within that hotspot, if the temporal analysis shows at different times of the day, different parts of the hotspot are hot on different days of the week. It might say that in the afternoon, it's the street drinkers by the benches on the War Memorial, but Thursday morning, it's the probation office, because you get a cohort from 2 boroughs coming there, and you're likely to get tension. If it's in the evening, it's actually at the train station. But don't just walk up the platform. You get on the stop, 1 up, 1 north, on the 3rd carriage from the front, and that will open directly outside of the waiting room on the station platform. That's where you catch them doing the drug dealing. So that level of specificity in the tasking, when I've seen it done well in one force, really provides the information available to the officers, so that if they want to be proactive, they can. Because you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's providing really detailed information to give them the detail or the name of the person at the small shop that's having a problem, so the officer can go there and say, "Hello, Simon. We heard you've having some problems." That personal connection, that giving them the start of a 10, really makes a difference. The other bit is the training, and this sort of links a little bit to the sometimes the resistance that officers believe crime's just going to get pushed around the corner, and they think crime's going to. They don't understand why they're being asked to go for 15 minutes, and they don't understand that hotspots are remarkably persistent. So where I've seen it done really well, this is where I've seen the difference. It goes from grudging compliance to engagement. This is about Simon Sinek, The Power of Why. If you tell someone what you want them to do, maybe they'll do it. You tell them how to do it, they might do it a bit better. But if you tell them why you want to do it, that makes a huge difference. So the training where I've seen it done very well is everyone that is volunteering for this overtime has to go to a briefing session, potentially a recorded explanation. But that talks about David Weisberg's evidence that crime doesn't just get displaced around the corner. It provides pictures of that Jersey City study from 2006 with open-air drug markets that shows there is diffusion of benefit, not just placement around the corner. It shows when he did it for street-based sex work as well, it was the same. That is convincing the officers that crime doesn't get to just pushed around the corner. And then explaining the why for the 15 minutes, it's showing Chris Coper's curve, talking about it, talking the fact that it's 1995, so it's a while ago, but he's got researchers with clipboards there looking to see, after the police go, how long to the next incident. That, when it's done well, engages the hearts and minds of the officers, so they buy into it more. So for me, it's the 6 T's. targeting, testing, tracking, tasking, technology and training, but the most discretionary benefit, or where I've seen it make the biggest difference, is the tasking and the training.
No, that's amazing. Thank you. I mean, there's so much for me to unpick there, but let me just pick
Sorry.
2 bits. No, it's great. I'm going to pick 2 bits, and then I'm going to, Colin, I'm just going to come across to you and sort of ask you to play those through some Lincolnshire lens. The specificity side, that's music to my ears, in the sense of what the crime analyst in me is thinking, yes, this is what we need to be doing. I think you said you'd seen that in one force, Simon?
Yeah.
Which force was that?
Northumbria.
Oh, I got you out straight away.
I'm not going to criticise anyone, but I refer to the 3 staff there as the tasking A team. So it's Lindsay, Claire, and Nicola, who together really fantastically gripped this. So Claire was vetting who was tasked with the overtime patrols, and if they didn't provide a good enough quality return, Claire had an awful lot of operational experience, and she quite bluntly say, if you don't do a good job, you're not getting it next time. She was vetting them. Lindsay was providing really good briefing slides for each, really specific. Lindsay was also feeding back to the PCs when they put in a return that provided some useful information. It's just a thank you. It doesn't have to be doesn't cost money or time. It's a human courtesy, but that works. And they were being regularly updated. There were thank you emails, and the top cover was coming from Nicola around this, so that as a team, the volunteers and the inspectors who managed them were being held to account for the quality of the delivery, and it was a virtuous circle. So I'm not going to criticise everyone, but they did a really good job. That's a task.
I'm not going to do name and shame, but name and praise is cool.
Yes,
which is nice. That's good. So you got a combination, I presume, there of officers and staff, sort of all mixing in.
Yes.
Okay, Colin, I know I'm setting you up for Fiona, because we've just heard about how one force is sort of really sort of got into this and doing it in the way we'd like to see, and I suspect most forces listening to this would go, great, but where's the capacity to do that? What does this look like in terms of the task inside of hotspots for you in Lincolnshire?
So we rolled out hotspot policing prior to the government funded hotspot policing initiative a few years ago in Boston now, and that was on the back of a murder of a 9-year-old girl on the street. So it was quite an emotive subject. So the tasking part initially to start off with, it wasn't too difficult to get people on board, because we had something that really emotional that had occurred. We generated a lot of analytical work, so we understood where the hotspots were, and then we started with probably a more orientated policing approach. So more than just the hotspots, patrols, really looking at those hotspots on a real holistic level. But in relation to the targeting, we tried to empower the teams initially and give them autonomy over the patrols. So, signing up and agreeing between themselves who would be doing it and when they'd be doing it, etc. They had real clear briefing slides, so they knew exactly where the hotspots were. They knew the times, they knew who was offending, they knew demographics. So we had really good analytical work behind it. Where it fell foul really was leaving it up to the practitioners to sort themselves out. We thought was a really good move initially, but it was good to a certain extent, but we didn't get the buy-in from everybody. So we didn't have that precision in delivering. We didn't have the consistency that we wanted. So of course it didn't work as well as it could have done. So we brought it back to the team, and actually what we then did was took it away with the University of Lincoln, who were working on this with us, and we put on a team away day where the whole team to the Boston Neighbour Policing team could actually design what this was going to look like in practice. So we got more buy-in, and then we had a bit of more direction from the sergeants and myself as an inspector over who's doing it, when we're doing it, etc. So there was still some empowerment there with the teams, but there was much more direction. but critically, we brought them into the design of that after we had a bit of a failed start, if you like. And that really brought the people in, that really got people on board. And it then, and I'm going off topic a little bit, but then it expanded into partners doing patrols with us. It really, really took off, and we ended up with a lot of funding for it, a lot of partners coming on board, and some real good legacy to that as well. So getting the tasking part was really important, so having the analytical work, but bringing the team on that journey and having them involved in designing that was really, really important.
So what I've heard from you both so far is that this sort of principles of organizational justice and engage, the management 101 stuff, right? Engage your staff, give feedback loops. Those are really important here, and I think that's a really interesting nugget, because it can often get lost in the sort of transactional element around do the patrol, crime will go down. Colin, did you see when officers, you've empowered the officers to begin with to sort of design, do it themselves, didn't quite take? Is that a cultural thing? Is there some sort of cultural resistance there on the front line to this sort of patrolling or this sort of intervention? What was your observation there?
I think there was a few problems. I mean, my background is in academics, in microbiology, so it's not police or criminology. But I appreciated evidence-based policing, whereas some of my colleagues just didn't appreciate it. And I think providing examples, operational examples, helped as well. So I remember reading about, I think it was the BTP on the Underground in London. Being able to provide live examples of where it's worked, I think helped translate it. I think the other problem that I had was, part of being a neighbourhood policing team, particularly in Lincolnshire. I don't want to take in other forces, but most of my teams had, real autonomy over what they were doing, almost on a day-by-day basis, within reason. But actually, we were saying to people that we expect you to be here at this time for this period of time, and really taking some of that autonomy away. So it's trying to get the evidence-based policing approach, get that concept embedded, but also understanding actually, some of the autonomy is taken away, but this is the benefits and this is why we're doing it. And actually, in the long term, there will be some really good benefits to hotspot policing.
And what was the key to that? To getting them in a room and talking to them, or trying any other ways of doing that?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things really. I think it was the away day that we had with the University of Lincoln. So there was some internal funding that the university obtained, and it was around giving some operational examples of where it's worked well previously, but having them as a team involved in the design of what we're going to do. So really part of that, not just the hotspot patrols, but the whole problem orientated policing approach, but using the basics of SARA, so building it around that. And I think that helped get the team on board. I wouldn't say fully, there's still people that are skeptical of it, but we got people on board and we got more compliance, but also having that direction from the sergeants in particular to make sure that we are doing it, when we should be doing it, etc., and trying to minimise those external issues that prevent us from doing those patrols.
Okay. So Simon, is in your sort of journey around the forces across the country, the scepticism from officers having to put boots on the ground a regular thing? And I say scepticism in a sort of healthy way, but resulting in this compliance issue is something that has come up time and time again in hotspots with actually officers being able to do the patrols. How commonplace did you find that?
It does tend to vary as to whether or not the officers doing it are volunteers or voluntold. If they're in overtime, they're volunteering for it, or they're just tasked to it on re-rostered days. There did appear to be quite a strong correlation with that. What I did say was I totally agree with what Colin was saying, in that the value of an away day when there's a cohort of officers that are going to own the hotspot. It sounds really trite, but a meeting with sandwiches where they're actually valued and there's a bit of co-production of the plan. They're consulted with. It's not presented as a fait accompli, thinking this is what we think the hotspot is, explaining there is a desire to integrate the SARA model into the hotspot policing, so that the officers tasked to the hotspots can be filling intelligence gaps to develop the analysis that will therefore provide a tangible benefit to the officers that own that hotspot in the community going forward. That makes a difference. It's the co-creation. If you're just sending in officers with limited amount of information, very limited briefing, and telling them to patrol the hotspot, should we really be surprised that it's not as good as when they're engaged, they're encouraged, they explain the why, and they have some ability to inform or shape what's done? I mean, it's good practice, isn't it?
How widely are you seeing that? How widely do you think that's happening?
Not much.
Right. Okay. That's good. It's a cool point to sort of take out of this, I think, and push to people trying to do hotspots. It's really useful. I want to talk about the tech a little bit, because that was, I think, the 6th T, Simon, that you mentioned. I start with you on this side from the perspective of tracking patrols and how routinely patrols are being done. So my question here is around what the key elements of getting that tech in place are, and I'm kind of going with this on the basis that some kind of tech is necessary, but please do comment on that if you found differently, and then we can sort of get into the how it works bit from there. And Colin, I'll bring you in to sort of talk about that from a Lincolnshire perspective. Long question, Simon. Hope that made sense.
So the tech, obviously forces are in a very different positions. Some have shared IT services with other forces and therefore don't have the agency to make a unilateral decision about what they're going to change. So they're tied into partnership arrangements. I have seen and I do see a very patchwork landscape. So some forces are using Thames Valley Police, so this is a positive, so I'm going to cite the force, had a very good app that when an officer walked into the hotspot, they clicked the app, it told them some information, it started to record the 20 minutes at the end, they clicked it and could send something back. That was a very effective way of tracking what was going on. Some forces were using the airwave radios, looking for the signal to that to indicate the officer was in the hotspot. The challenge with that is when you're in a very built up urban environment, the signal can jump from one mast to another. So it looks like the officer is actually left the hotspot. The technical workaround for that is putting a buffer zone around it, so you don't have to manually edit every time the officer sort of jumps out. Other forces have used GPS tracker devices the officers pick up at the start of a shift. The downside with that is one officer actually took it on holiday with them and it caused the system to break because he was traveling far too fast and was way outside the hotspot, and the batteries run out, they need to be recharged. Other forces have used the app that talks about the emergency responder. It was originally a health service thing. Good Samaritan, Good Sam app to track where they're there. And another force that was really challenged with the IT, they were actually manually dip sampling body-worn camera footage to verify the officer was in the location. That's clearly very inefficient. But there was still some good that came out of that, because one of the officers, let's call him PC Rose, was walking through the hotspot, not engaging with anyone, and the dip sampling or review of his body-worn footage indicated he wasn't. He had a meeting without biscuits and was encouraged to actually patrol the hotspot in a proper way, engaging and speaking to people. So there's a whole raft of technological solutions. I don't think there is one best answer. It depends on the restrictions and limitations of the IT architecture of the force, and also their resources. So there's no one right answer. There's, some are more inefficient than others, but I think it's been very context specific.
Yeah. Okay. So Colin, what's the context in Lincoln?
Yeah, so in Boston, when we started it a few years ago, we didn't have the technology. We explored airwave GPS tracking, that became quite difficult just because of having the capacity and the expertise to be able to exploit that and understand that. When you're looking at the evaluation, I know with the government money that we've got a BlackBerry app that I think relies on the cops going in, but then submitting a report at the end of the shift. I think the technology side is quite an exciting opportunity to really develop the hotspot policing patrols in particular. But I think it's a real, as Simon said, that real patchwork approach at the moment throughout the policing nationally. So we're not in the best position. I think we're doing the best we can with the technology that we've got, but I think there's a lot more scope to for that to come online and provide some real good insight and information that will help evaluate the hotspots.
So for you, is it about dialogue with your teams and reassurance from that around monitoring what they're doing, the extent they're doing it?
Yeah, and getting that feedback, from the specific patrols themselves, but also the evaluation to understand, are relying on the cops and the staff doing those patrols, but seeing the results. I think in Boston, when we started, like I said earlier on, we didn't have a great uptake, but when we got it right, we saw a 50% reduction in street-related drinking ASB and large reductions in ASB itself, across the hotspots. So we knew that it was working. I couldn't say that every single patrol was being done as it should be done because we didn't have that technology to be able to track it efficiently at that point.
But when the outcomes are good, then you can make a case for it doesn't matter too much.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Colin, that partners have become involved in doing some of your patrol work, which must sound very attractive to a lot of areas. I think. What advice would you give to other forces about going about trying to secure and actually maintain partner involvement in hotspot strategies?
I think it's more than just the patrols. I think it's looking at the hotspots themselves on a real holistic basis. And again, with the university, we got some internal funding from the university to be able to put on a partnership day. In fact, we had 2 partnership days, and we had around 50 to 60 people sat in a room. We presented to them the hotspots that we'd developed in Boston. So we ended up with 4 hotspots in Boston. And we wanted that real holistic approach to dealing with those hotspots, where the patrols were just one of those tools. But having that analytical product, we were able to get just over £300,000 in funding for 8 different initiatives. So things like CCTV gaps in coverage within the hotspots, community wardens that worked for the council. So they were initially a 1-year fixed term contracts. They've now turned into a full-time permanent contracts. Community engagement officer that would help bridge police in the community and the local authority. So getting them involved in the hotspots is that really wide piece, around understanding what's going on, from a offender, victim, location point of view. Community engagement is really important. So we did a survey and we got something like 1 in 69 of the residents of the Borough of Boston to respond to that survey. So we understood from the community point of view what their concerns were in relation to the hotspots. So all of that worked really, really well together. But I think it was using all of that to get the partners on board. So for example, we have the local prison, HMP North Sea Camp. Their prison is an open prison. They work in the hotspots. They planted like 4,000 bulbs, 200 hanging baskets, for the hotspots, because we had a design out crime officer doing an environmental assessment for each of the hotspots as well. So we understood from a victim, suspect, location point of view what the issues were. And I think it was that amount of work. So we had, and I'll name him because he deserves the praise, a guy called Matt Gray, really good analyst, did that analytical work for us. So the scanning and then the analysis. That's what brought the partners in, as well as some really nice maps that showed you the hotspots.
Can't beat a good map. I mean, so Simon, let me zoom out then and just talk about analysts in general and what you've seen across the country. Can you tell us how? I mean, they are important to the hotspot mapping process in general, but how are they best engaged and used in your observations?
Sorry, I need to take my mute off. So for me, it's more a responsibility of the senior investigating officer. Please, please, please don't ask your analysts to just produce hotspot maps. Don't tell them what you want. Tell them what the problem is and ask them what they can do for you. It's a so much more empowering question. A lot of your analysts have fantastic capability on wasting their time producing heat maps and getting them to refresh them all the time is such an inefficient use of their time. I would, if you look at a senior investigating officer who's investigating murder, they don't want another detective. They want another analyst who can provide insight to the data. My plea would be, if you're looking at the hotspots, get your analyst in the same way that the SIO, senior investigating officer, walk. It's not like the Met who might walk over the scene, but goes to the scene of the crime and actually sees what's going on there. Walking around with the police community support officer, tapping into the knowledge that's in their head that isn't committed to paper. That insight and that building of a relationship will get so much more value from the analyst. I think the analysts are enormously underutilized and can do so much more, but they need to be empowered by the owner of the plan, by the hotspot inspector, chief inspector, whomever. They've got to unleash that creativity. They've got to get them to the scene, walking around with the PCSO on a late turn, developing that relationship that enables the intelligence to start to flow and inform the tasking.
I've got to take it off mute now. That's really helpful. Thank you. Really helpful. Colin, how are you keeping these partners engaged? Because everybody loves a sandwich and a biscuit and a away day to brainstorm these things. But it's much harder to do as business as usual. What's your trick?
Well, to be fair, I've moved on since the work. One of the issues there, it's a really important thing, but one of the issues, and I'll come back to the question in a minute, was a lot of this was built initially around me, trying to bring this on in Boston. But what we did with the partners, we gave them responsibility, or we had shared responsibility for the plan. So it wasn't just a plan for Colin that Colin generated in Boston, Lincolnshire. It was a plan that we all owned, and we all owned various aspects of it. So even like the prison, albeit quite a minimal role, they still had an involvement from a management point of view in designing what we were doing. Local authority, really heavy involvement. So it's having that shared responsibility, but equally, the funding applications that we put in, and we got, like I said, just over £300,000. That was joint funding applications, and actually the beneficiaries, from a financial point of view, were mainly the local authority. So it was shared ownership and shared responsibility that was really critical. And then, of course, network and understanding each other's pressures and what skills and capabilities each organisation could bring to the party, so to speak.
So I mean, the evidence base sort of tentatively says problem solving is sort of the most effective tactic you can undertake in hotspot policing. Although I could do a whole session on that. I'm interested, Colin. You're saying it's sort of with the neighbourhood policing teams that have got ownership of managing the hotspots. And Simon, I'd be interested to know how that lays across the country in your experience. I was speaking to some police constable degree apprenticeship graduates in the last couple of weeks who were sort of saying to me, just proactivity, just not going to happen. The radio, doing paperwork once you've been to jobs, all of that sort of interrupts with taking that proactive approach that hotspot policing requires. My question for you, Simon, is where do you think this sits best? Is that in neighbourhood policing teams, or is it better somewhere else?
I think where I have seen it sit most effectively is the ownership within neighbourhood policing, but usually supported by overtime patrols funded across the policing area, but with some opportunity for input from those local policing units as to what the problem is, what they want. That it's going back to co-creation. Predominantly, the hotspot policing is delivered in overtime, which is ultimately an inefficient model. but because of all the pressures on a late turn for response staff, otherwise the patrols aren't going to get done. So it becomes the least worst option. But where I've seen it work most effectively is the ownership does sit with the neighbourhood team. They have some say or are able to shape what they want from those patrols.
Superb. And I can see you kicking me under the virtual table to say, could you say something about the partners and keeping them engaged? So let me give you the floor for that.
Thank you. So what I have seen in a couple of forces is that more of a methodology to keeping partners involved. So the idea is it's like a partnership, is like a business. It thrives if everyone gets out more than they put in. So that's the profit and loss of the public sector, if you like. Now, the skill for the senior police leader who's owning that partnership is that the key performance indicators for that partnership involve the key performance indicators for each agency, so that they're working to something they will be internally measured for. So it's not an exploitative relationship. That enables the partnership to flourish because everyone's getting out more than they put in. Collectively, the commitment is delivering a KPI which they are individually measured on, because otherwise it becomes an exploitative partnership and it gets withered, it withers on the vine, because people don't commit their resource to something when they're getting nothing from it. I mean, there is to another level, it's potentially deposits in an emotional bank balance over time when you get that trust. But certainly at the early stage, it's ensuring that the key performance indicators for the partnership with the hotspot policing are delivering things that all partners are accountable for. If you're working with the registered social landlord, one of the KPIs they are going to be interested in is antisocial behaviour reported by their tenants. If part of the patrols or the work seeks to monitor that and reduce that or improve trust and confidence, that's something they can meaningfully commit to, because the estate manager is accountable to their boss around delivering that. It is geared up to work if it's built that way. That's what I've seen.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm gonna turn it over to you, please.
Which question in particular?
To ask the questions.
Do you mean the audience questions?
Yes, please.
Right, okay. So anyone who's watching live, obviously this will stay where it can be watched. So this will be on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook and X for the Police Science Doctor accounts as well. You can't put any more questions in because this is live. But if you're watching live and you have a question, then please put it into the comments where you're watching. So we've got one here. Let me just show this. So TJ is asking, do you have a view on how often hotspots should be refreshed for a given crime type? Our analysis has found the most harmful places to be remarkably persistent over more than 5 years, at least on a macro level. Who would like to take that? Was it Simon?
I'll go first. So TJC, you're absolutely right. The example that I normally use when I'm explaining to officers to try and win their hearts and minds around this displacement sort of idea, I talk about the work of Christabel Weinborn, who looked at Birmingham around hotspots. So he looked at the persistence of hotspots over 8 years. So he looked at the hottest hotspots in Birmingham. This was done by street segment. It doesn't really matter how you define them, but that was his unit of analysis. And he looked in year one at the hottest hotspots. So in year two, 77% of the hottest hotspots were still there. And that other sort of 33%, they weren't cold, they were still blooming warm. And then the next year it's 64%, 57%, 52%, 47%, 43%, 40%. 8 years later, 40% of the hottest hotspots were still the hottest hotspots, and the others were still warm too. So they are phenomenally persistent or sticky. What you do see, though, is whilst the hotspots are remarkably persistent, the persons committing crime in them, the felonious few or whatever you want to call them, that churns massively. But the places tend to stay the same. And that links back to the point I tried to make earlier about the use of the analyst. You don't need them creating hotspot maps every month or every fortnight for a tasking meeting. Please go quarterly and reinvest that time asking your analyst to go to that hotspot, walk with the PCSO, and then provide a deeper analysis, a thematic analysis, and start to contribute to a problem-oriented policing approach as to what could be done within that hotspot. That will offer so much more insight, so much more value, develop relationships between the analyst and the local policing team, improve intelligence flow, improve the quality of the tasking, improve the quality of the briefing, and it starts a virtuous circle. So, yeah, it can be done an awful lot less, in my opinion.
Colin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd echo what Simon said in relation to some of the points that he made, in particular about the analyst and the hotspots, mapping them. So we looked at post-COVID around 2.5 years worth of data to develop our 4 hotspots in Boston. And it was relatively new to me at that point in time. So we then, after 6 months, we reran the data with 6 months worth of data, which wasn't the biggest. But what we found is actually the hotspots didn't change. There was very, very negligible changes in the locations. So we're really happy with that. But what Simon said about getting out into the hotspots with the analysts and partners, we did exactly that. There was probably around 20 of us as a group walking around all these hotspots, which were all relatively close together because Boston's quite a small area. So we had the design up crime officer, the crime analyst, we had local authority, the leader of the local authority, various councillors, Boston in Bloom. We had lots of different people walking around the hotspots, so we could all understand it from our own agency's point of view and what we needed to deliver on. So yeah, really echo what Simon said. Get out there, but with all those partners, with your analysts, it's really important to understand. You can see what's happening, and the people as well. Just to echo what Simon said again, the people changed. We looked at all the repeat victims and repeat offenders, and put support packages in place for those people. Looked at the demographics, so we knew who we could target on a higher level, and those did change as we went through those times, but the locations didn't.
Splendid. Okay, so I think it's clear to me that everybody is, in fact, in a beer garden and not asking questions. So we are sacrificing for the greater good here. I'm going to ask one more question before we sign off. I'm going to put it to both of you. In the hypothetical scenario where you are parachuted into a new district or new BCU and told to deliver hotspot policing strategy, what are the first things on your to-do list from day one in the job to get that done? Accepting you can have 101 other things to do as well, of course, but focusing just on the hotspots to start with. Simon, let's start with you.
Okay, so for me, then, I obviously want to start with the targeting. I'd want to understand exactly what types of offences are being targeted, because if it's a hotspots of violence, I'm interested in state-based crime. I'm less interested in state-based crime. I'm more interested in victim-based crime. So possession of drugs, possession of offensive weapons, an assault against police. An assault against police or possession of drugs are measures of proactivity or proactive policing. A victim-based crime where a member of the public is assaulted or threatened, that is a better measure of public safety. So being really specific around what types of offences are being measured. I'd then also I'd want to know how the force or the BCU are able to understand what is public place crime and what is private place crime. Because if you're talking about hotspot policing, it is not in a very good place to be able to prevent private place crime, violent crime taking place behind locked doors in a private place. It is not geared up to do that. So you then need to add into that, if the reality of your ability to deliver hotspot policing is up to 10, 11 p.m. at night, if you're doing a temporal analysis that shows all crime, and your hotspots are disproportionately influenced by crime that's happening at 1, 2 in the morning, and you're not going to be able to put your policing resource there, and that crime that's taking place in there is taking place in private places, you're measuring the wrong thing precisely. So what I'd first want to do is ensure that we're measuring the type of crime that can be prevented by hotspot policing. I'd want to be measuring it in the hours of the day that we're able to deploy asset to prevent crime. I then want a seasonal analysis, because some of the hotspots that are hot in the summer are not hot in the winter. The park in February is going to have a totally different profile of violent crime to the summer. So it needs that seasonal analysis. And then on top of that, I'm making a lot of requests of the analysts, but I think they're good requests. I'd want to know, what false hotspots have you got? Everyone knows that a custody suite is a hotspot of crime. It's not because there's lots of bad things happening there, but officers arrest people, they come to the police, they search them, they find weapons and drugs. The location of the discovery of that offence is the custody suite. So you've got to remove those hotspots, those false hotspots, from your analysis. You've got to think about the prisons, the hospitals. The prison, clearly, I would say, should be taken out. The hospital, there's more of a question around. But you've got to remove your false hotspots. You've got to look around if there are accuracy and coding issues, in that everyone codes the violent crime in a park to the geolocation centre of the park, rather than the swings in one area or bits and pieces like that. So you've got to understand your data. So getting your analysts to walk the scene, understand your targeting process at the start, because you've got to get that right before anything else.
Amazing. I would have loved that.
We've got a question from James Ross. What are the panel's views on the length of time an officer needs to be in the location to deter crime? Who would like to answer that?
I mean, I'm happy to, if you want. I mean, Matt, you're
going to give a Cobra curve stock answer, aren't you? But go for it. You go for it.
There is a bit of that, but so Chris Cope of the Cobra curve talks about 15 minutes being the optimum, but there's also a concept of hotspot needs to be small enough to see and be seen. So if the hotspot gets a bit bigger, and I think, Matt, the great work you did in Bedfordshire, Operation Rowan, a few years ago. So there was that the hotspots were bigger there, and therefore, if it's a bigger hotspot, arguably you need more time in it. You looked at, if you look at some of the work with the bigger hotspots, there's a force that have done something. There's two forces have done something with local wardens preventing violent crime, and they're doing the work they're doing looks at engaging with young people and having more lengthy conversations about diversion and referral work. That isn't really necessarily done in 15 minutes. So the evidence so far, and COPA goes back to 1995. It's a long time ago. So maybe that's not a bad place to start. But if there's a mandate that you might want to be there longer because it's a bigger hotspot and you've got to walk around it, or you want to be there for some, detailed personal conversations around engagement and diversion with young people in the hotspot, maybe you want to be there long too. But I mean, I think you start of a 10, maybe it's 15 minutes if it's small. But there's no one right answer. There's a wrong answer if they want you to stand on a fixed point for 2 hours.
Yeah. I'm interested, Colin, in terms of the problem-solving approach is one that really sort of would normally fix itself to not a specific duration of time, because it's very dependent on the problem that you're trying to solve. What instructions are you giving what instructions do the Boston team have around patrol duration?
So it was in line with the 15 minutes, but with it, there's a bit of a caveat to that, because what one of the PTSOs did, a guy called Nigel Grant, he developed a relationship with We Are With You, who were the substance misuse charity in Lincolnshire. So I tried to go in, and this is a little bit of a tangent, I tried to go in at management level to get some buy-in for some hotspot patrols, so we could, make those referrals, engage with people that potentially causing some of the issues. and it was, absolutely not. We shouldn't be seen with police, etc. So I failed quite miserably, whereas Nigel went in and ended up doing it, and really got buy-in from practitioners. So the hotspots ended up being 15 minutes, when it was officer only. But when it was We Are With You, it really depended what was happening, who was out and about, as to how long they'd spend in that particular hotspot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think a 15 minutes thing is a fascinating thing. I could probably do a whole session on that as well. Maybe next week. Colin, let me just finish off by asking you that question about the top things, you're parachuting into a new area to set up a hotspot program, or the top things that are on top of your to-do list.
So how it started in Boston, and I took a very similar approach, was, what matters to the public, what are their perceptions, because that's how we ended up designing the criteria of what crime and what ASB and what information we're going to include, to then start mapping and producing those heat maps. And again, very similar to Simon, having that analytical package so that we really understand not just where the hotspots are, but what's going on inside them, who's doing what, who are the victims, who are the suspects. But at the same time, to that, getting the team on board with the training, getting the team on board with understanding the value of delivering hotspot policing, and the partners as well. So we did it a bit piecemeal. We started off with the analytics, that we moved on to trying to get the team on board, but actually a lot of this should be done simultaneously, so that you're delivering a lot quicker. And then the other part that we was really important to us was getting that funding stream, because for obvious reasons at the minute, funding's quite limited in policing, and it was back then. But identifying funding opportunities to fund some of the work, particularly around the partnership work, and bringing in that holistic approach was really important. So those are probably my top 3 or 4 things that I'd start off with, to start getting the hotspots developed, or the hotspot policing developed.
It's amazing. Thank you both, Simon and Colin, for sharing your knowledge and experience on this topic. I've made a list of things, list of notes here in my notebook as we've been talking, that would possibly be sequel sessions that we could do about hotspot duration and engaging team in design, and how to take these things forward. For anybody who's registered for this webinar, there will be some debrief notes that will be sent around in the next few days that summarize the key takeaways from the discussion that we've had. And if you are watching, then you will see that I've got a poster behind me which is flagging up other events that we've got this summer, where we will inevitably be talking about hotspots further. We have both David Weisberg and Larry Sherman, who were the architects of this program, coming to our global SEBP conference in Cambridge on the 21st and 22nd of July. And we'll be talking about hotspot approaches at the front end in terms of retail crime and other topics at the National Evidence-Based Policing Conference in Huddersfield in September. Please go to the website and check out the details on those. Otherwise, I will say a final thank you to my co-hosts and guests, and we will see you in a month's time for another session on problem-oriented policing. Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.